Louis Vuitton has just launched makeup to quite some controversy. Many people online were up in arms about the price, but actually, behind the scenes, beauty editors and journalists had gripes all of their own, which aren't yet out in the public consciousness. So today we're going to break down the launch and explain why all of the controversy that you know about is actually a good thing, and why all the controversy you don't yet know about is bad. So for this video, I'm going to split it into my favorite 4 P's of marketing, the marketing mix. That's place, product, price, and promotion. And we're going to go from least controversial to most controversial. Yes, prices not last, and you will see why when we get there. So starting with place, obviously La Beauté will be stocked in Louis Vuitton stores the world over, and also by 24 Sèvres, which is an online curator of Parisian style that primarily stocks LVMH-owned brands because, shock and gasp, they're also owned by LVMH. They also launched with 2 pop-up stores, one in New York and one in Seoul, keeping that exclusivity factor while also having a buzzworthy event for the general public. The last 2 stockists were in Harrods in the UK, whose exclusivity does make sense given their stature, and with Shinsegae Duty Free in Incheon Airport in Seoul, which, aside from clearly showing they're pushing very hard for a Korean audience, the Shinsegae Duty Free store actually does look like a Louis Vuitton store within the airport, so it's actually not as off-brand as it sounds in name. All of this within place tells us they're very concerned about keeping control over their distribution logistics. And that's not really a surprise. It's a scarcity tactic we often see in luxury, and it doubly works to get as many people as possible physically into the Louis Vuitton stores where they may be upsold on, say, a bag or some clothes. Because, contrary to how they are generally perceived, they are a luxury brand that primarily targets the mass market, while the high net worth individuals that are also their customers serve as a secondary market. They do this intentionally and have done since Bernard Arnault consolidated all of LVMH under Christian Dior SA in 1992, and it is an important distinction between themselves and their main competitors, Chanel and Hermes. To quote Jay Tibbetts, who has recently been making waves for his reels and TikToks breaking down the perception of luxury, he said, quote, "Oh, here's a great example. When you walk into the Louis Vuitton flagship on Place Vendôme, you enter a massive salon floor. Fragrance, leather goods, shoes. The floor is packed. Walk up the other 4+ floors of the massive store. Empty. Mind you, these are the ready-to-wear floors, bespoke trunks, customization, furniture, some of the most exquisite things the brand makes. All empty, no people. The store is set up to cater to the shopper they prioritize and know will spend. The aspirational goods that people can take as a trinket home from Paris." This, frankly, is the target for the cosmetics. It's not the high luxury customer, it's the, to repeat what Jay said, aspirational goods that people can take as a trinket. Effectively, it's something that someone can appreciate aesthetically within their home as a piece of accessible luxury. This, of course, brings us on to our second P, product. So let's move on to product, because for this, there's 3 main ways to slice it. There's the packaging, the product itself, i.e. the formulas, and the attachment of Pat McGrath, which is part product, part marketing, but we're going to talk about it here nonetheless. So firstly, the packaging is intended to be reusable, despite what you may have heard online. Thus far, it's not been used in ethical marketing whatsoever, but it is intended to be reusable, and that's something they may dip into later on down the line. I'll admit I don't love reusable packaging because generally it does lead to more consumer waste, especially if they're supposedly targeting a high luxury customer who may not care about the price point. However, I do put it to you that these cosmetics are intended for the aspirational luxury customer, so not a professional makeup artist as the packaging is heavily weighted, and not a high luxury customer who don't take the bulk of the positioning of Louis Vuitton in retail anyway. Therefore, for the aspirational customer, this actually might be a good thing, as because the price point of the product in the reusable packaging is so high, $250 and $160, I actually do genuinely believe a aspirational customer, a mid-luxury customer, is likely to refill the product. But of course, that's not to say that the packaging, the higher price packaging, isn't worth the higher price point. By the looks of it, it's very well done. The palette is fully in metal and stone, the lipstick cases are heavily weighted and smooth to use. Even the details of the product are actually etched into the metal, so there's no stickers. Considering there are 55 lipsticks, 10 lip balms, 8 eyeshadow palettes, that's quite an investment to have made. As such, it is a very high quality refill package and does fully materialize this high quality product, especially in comparison to, say, Chanel, who uses plastic. Therefore, despite the fact that I personally don't love reusable packaging because of the waste, it actually does fit very well within their target market, who are more likely to refill if they are looking for that luxury brand signaling in the first place. Also, the reason that I'm showing you this video of this lady, whose government name is Sophia Sees Beauty, is because she points out that the individual pans on the eyeshadow palette are actually replaceable. So you can mix and match to form your own set, which I think is nice. It's a more premium option. Whether they'll sell individual colors as refills in the future, I'm not sure, but they could. She also points out that the eyeshadow palette quality is more distant than its competitors in this sense, as there wasn't much innovation found on the lipsticks comparatively. She compares the lipsticks to Guerlain and Celine lipsticks, which she says are equally nice for a much lower price point, which is important because she seems to be part of that aspirational consumer target market. All in all, save for that last point, the packaging is a real home run. So let's quickly discuss the product formulas themselves. Made by Pat McGrath, the quality thus far seems to be decent. It's on par with other luxury products that are already on the market. I searched for complaints actively actually for this, and I didn't really find them other than personal preferences. The largest complaint in that sense is really just how the quality doesn't match the price. They say it's high quality, but a higher price. There's also a lot of comparisons obviously to Pat McGrath Labs, but mainly people seem to think they're very, very different, which I do think is a good thing, because if Pat McGrath keeps going the way that it is with their strange cheapening collaborations, it did have the risk to affect the Louis Vuitton brand value. But no, they seem to be vastly different, which is a bit of a relief, frankly. Both the lipstick and the eyeshadow are more user-friendly than Pat McGrath Labs in that sense as well, which is also good for their aspirational mass market target market. All in all, I think it's a pretty solid category. Third is price, and it's likely why you clicked on this video. It has been the biggest scandal about the brand, full stop. Mostly because of the reporting of the refillable price for $250 for the eyeshadow palette and $160 for the lipstick. As I kind of said before, this is a little misrepresentative because a lot of the outlets totally ignored the fact that the refill price of $92 and $69 is actually more in line with the price points of their biggest competitors. Say Hermes, who has lipstick for $82 for the refillable packaging and then $50 for the refills, or Chanel, which goes up to $195 for Trente Le Rouge and $90 for the refill. Chanel prices do vary wildly, so that's the top of their line, but still it's comparative. Chanel and Hermes are probably the two most compared lines to La Beauté, and it's not because they're the most luxurious cosmetics on the market, but actually because their target market is the most similar to La Beauté. They are brand equity-led for consumers, they are perceived luxury brands, and they are generally quality brands. Also, historically, they are two brands that LVMH have tried to get their hands on in the past and failed, leaving LVMH themselves to state explicitly that they are their main competitors. So by Louis Vuitton choosing to go above them on the price point is a very well calculated strategy to position their own products as better and to push their own product onto that aspirational mass market audience which both Hermes and Chanel do target. Ergo, they are trying to eat into their market share. They're trying to take the people who are buying to keep up with the Joneses. It's also worth saying that LVMH, if you didn't know, is the parent to Louis Vuitton, but is also parent company to many other luxury cosmetics brands. They have Dior, Celine, Guerlain, and Givenchy, just for a couple of examples. Having another brand at that exact price point can only really serve to hurt the sales of their own brands, or to seemingly agree that they are in some way lesser than Hermes or Chanel, who do target a slightly higher price point. All in all, their tactic to surpass them in price simultaneously had the effect of differentiating them from their own brands and re-establishing their dominance over Chanel and Hermes, who I'm sure now feel pressure to compete with the higher price. The fact that their packaging was more luxurious than both also played into that exactly as well. It was physically better as well as pricier. It was sure to have been an intentional dig to make the other top luxury brands look lacking in some way to the mass market aspirational audience. All ties back to that. Promotion is our last P from the marketing mix, and surprisingly, there's quite a lot to discuss. But it all revolves around bought versus earned media. So bought media are things like posters, the pop-ups that we talked about earlier, the face of the brand who's Jung Ho-young, and also influencers, etc. Well, earned media is everything free that comes from that. So the launch itself was very clever in that it used the high price point in bought media to create a lot of earned media, by which I mean they intentionally created their own scandal. Of course, I can't see their marketing plan, but it does seem to me that this was very likely their plan from the beginning, as even before launch, people were openly shocked at the very high price point. Before many influencers or commentators looked into the pricing to find out that it was actually refillables, they provided a lot of discussion about cost versus worth within this product, and I fully believe this was intended from the brand. The high price point reflects a high quality onto the brand and plays well into that aspirational audience who are more willing to pay based on brand equity. It's exactly the kind of signifier that someone who wants to project their purchases would enjoy. And furthermore, on that point, it presents a kind of scarcity that anyone can have in that sense. It's a contradiction in terms, but it is a hard to get to product in that you have to physically go to the store, but when you get there, it's easy to buy. It's a scarcity that anyone can have. This is exactly why in the beginning of the video I said that the scandal you know about is actually a positive for them. It gives them a more luxury feel to the overarching brand and is well targeted to that aspirational mass market target audience. All of these things for Louis Vuitton are good. Fake exclusivity is a good thing for an aspirational brand. However, the bought promotion is where the scandal you don't know yet lies. Something that's not yet out in the public consciousness is that Louis Vuitton actually did not send the full product to a series of influencers, journalists, and media outlets, but instead just allowed them to borrow the product for review. This is highly unusual. I've genuinely never heard of this for a cosmetic product before, especially because it puts all the creators who were sent the samples at risk of infection from sharing the product. To be fair, it does seem like the majority, the vast majority even, of influencers who did get it, got it gifted with no questions asked. I reached out to a lot of different influencers over this, and it does seem to be a small set, under about 100,000 followers on either Instagram or TikTok, and by and large it does seem to be that if they got it in one of these two boxes, so these people are not having to return it, for example. They got to keep it, and many of these creators didn't even know that some people were only lent the product, with a couple telling me that they didn't think that that was remotely possible because of sanitary reasons. No one as of yet has spoken about this publicly. I do assume not to get taken off the PR list, but it's certainly been a factor that's questionable for a few influencers. And to be honest, I don't really understand why they did it, even to a small subset. The risk seems to far outweigh the reward. Considering cosmetics are generally on about an 80% markup, and I do assume the Louis Vuitton ones are exactly the same as this, if not slightly higher, hypothetically, sending a single lipstick and a single eyeshadow palette to each of these influencers who didn't just straight up get it gifted would have only cost about $80. So it seems a lot of risk just for $80. If there was some kind of infection spread between the people that had to share them, then that could come down quite badly on the brand. Of course, I don't know how widespread this was. It was only a couple of people that were able to tell me that this happened to them, but it does make me question why, when there is so much discussion about this, so many different key opinion leaders, influencers, even traditional journalists would end their article or their video with something along the lines of, quote, "The launch comes as the French luxury giant faces a slowing global luxury market amid geopolitical and economic uncertainty. In the first half of fiscal 2025, its sales fell 4% on year to 46.8 billion. Perhaps this is their way of getting back at Louis Vuitton for not valuing the work that they're doing, at least to the point of $80, which is a very low price point even for somebody who is under 100,000 followers on Instagram. It's certainly worth that. If they're worth sending the product to, they're at least worth $80. This, as I said, has not been a scandal yet, and maybe it won't be because it was a small set of people. And regardless, even if it does become a bit of a scandal, I suppose Louis Vuitton has a strong PR team, so the influencers will come across looking as ungrateful for being included. But remembering that, inarguably, some of these influencers, micro-influencers included, have more impact on awareness and even sales than some traditional media, they do at least deserve to have been able to be valued in a similar way. In the end, this to me is their main point of weakness. Their price is actually a good thing for their target market. It just is. Their place and product too are decently planned to keep that scarce perception. So really, it's just their promotion that could cause issues down the line. In my opinion, it seems to come down to the fact that the launch was simultaneously dealt with a PR strategy as well as an advertising strategy, which I'll explain the difference between the two, because an advertising team tends to focus more on long-term structuring of the brand name. It's why companies like Chanel worked with the same advertising team 20 years before they poached their head of contracts, Kitty D'Alessio, who then in turn hired Karl Lagerfeld. There is a long-term aspect to it that builds brand equity. PR teams, on the other hand, tend to be more reactionary or short-term focused, trying to keep the attention at any cost for as long as possible, and/or fixing problems. This is why we get the Sydney Sweeney has great jeans ad or that Matt Rife Elf ad, which were both created by PR teams. To me, the reason why I felt like it's been done by both is because some of these journalists seem to have been dealt with an advertising budget, getting their press releases through in their email and getting the product on their doorstep, while others have been dealt with a PR strategy in terms of trying to get a few extra bits and bobs out there as much as they can in order to keep that information going. This to me is exactly why the scandal that you don't know about is the most risky, because it seems almost hasty. And in that, there's a risk that this could hurt relationships that they may one day need to depend on. Maybe one day they need Korea JoongAng Daily to write a great piece for them in defense of a Korean scandal. Now, of course, this is not to say Louis Vuitton are the only ones doing this. I have heard an incredible, far more than you would believe, amount of stories from influencers and journalists alike where big brands use their weight to try and milk people for earned content. It's happened to me a couple of times, actually. And it's not fun to feel disrespected in that way. It certainly doesn't make me feel loyal to the brands who don't value my platform or the information forward, opinion second manner in which I create. Effectively, it burns that bridge before it's really formed. So, for Louis Vuitton La Beauté to begin with burnt bridges is not necessarily smart for the long term and is their biggest point of weakness in case of a scandal or a better product comes out. Customers will get over a high price point, but nobody gets over being disrespected. Thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Actually, check out my Pat McGrath Labs video here. I know you'll like it. It's quite new. It's only a few days old by the time of recording this, actually. Also, for fashion videos like this, please check out Understitch here. And a special thank you goes out to my patrons over on Patreon for their ongoing support. All content used in this video is done so in accordance with the principles of fair use. However, if you have any concerns, please contact me directly at contact@understitch.co.uk.